I'm Dr. Radhika Thakra, and I'm hosting this chat on behalf of The Next Step. There are so many things as a graduate I wish I knew that university just didn't prepare me for. And that's where The Next Step comes in. I'm joined by Dr. Zani Khan, an academic F2, Dr. Simon Billingsley, and Dr. Maddie Young, who both started their foundation training this year. Welcome, everyone. We're going to have a chat about what it's like starting F1. I'm a paediatric ST4, but I remember that the transition from uni to working life can be a steep learning curve. Working full-time, taking on the role of a doctor, meeting new people and working in different teams, possibly moving to a new city and finding somewhere to live, making new friends, amongst other things. It's a lot to take on. So let's get started. So, Maddie, one of the first things to consider when you start F1 is where you're going to live. So can you tell me a bit more about that process for you?
Last 4 years I lived in Coventry, and I was just keen to make sure that the next place I lived had quite a bit going on, was a pretty place. Therefore, I got into the Oxford Deanery and I decided to choose Oxford, but my hospital is within the Oxford Deanery, but it's in Reading, Royal Berkshire Hospital. I chose that because I wanted the nice location. I've got a few friends in Oxford. I thought that would be a good fit. I'm still kind of finding my feet about whether that definitely is the right fit. So I did a lot of driving when I was in med school, and I thought, oh, I can handle a 45-minute hour drive. That's fine. I do that quite often. One thing to take into account is even if you like driving, even if you drive a lot, working full-time as a doctor or an F1 as I'm doing at the moment, it's a bit of a struggle when you finish a long shift, you're really tired, and then you've still got like an hour drive. It's kind of important to consider that when you're choosing.
Yeah, that's definitely one thing I've noticed over my years of being a doctor, that a short commute really makes a difference. At my last hospital, I was a 10-minute cycle from work, and just being able to start at 8 but not have to wake up till like 7:15 and still have enough time to get ready, have breakfast, get in early, made such a difference. With your choosing where to live, did you have any unexpected outgoings, or is there anything that surprised you with the living as a doctor rather than being at medical school?
I don't think necessarily surprised me, but there's that transition between being a med student and starting and getting your first paycheck. And I was a bit unlucky with my accommodation, so I couldn't move into the house we signed for until the end of August. So I got temporary accommodation for the first 6 weeks of me starting. That meant I had a deposit and a month or 2 weeks rent to pay for the first place. Also, my next place asked me for it, the month rent and deposit, a month and a half in advance. So I had basically 4 months of rent coming out at the same time before my first paycheck.
Yeah.
So that is not something I had planned for, and it's just how it all played out.
Yeah, Zani, Simon, that seems to be a common experience for a lot of F1s, having huge amounts of outgoings before you start. Have you any similar experiences?
My transition was okay, mostly because I didn't have a house when I started. So I'm working down in Sheffield and I live up in York. So the house buying process was not an easy one. It took me a little while, and we got messed around by the movers and stuff. So it took a long time. So I didn't have a house for my first month working. I had to commute from my parents' house in York. So that was like over an hour commute, which was fine. The petrol was a decent cost, to be fair. That basically felt like every penny I was earning, I was spending on petrol. It did mean that I didn't have to I wasn't constantly doing food shops, which I was for the first time. I didn't have to pay council tax straight away, which was a thing that I'd completely forgotten about as a student. You just don't have to do it, and then suddenly it's a huge amount of money. So the first month was a lot of fuel, and then after that, it was the classic outgoings of just doing full food shops for you and housemates, and then bills as well. Bills included as a student. I don't know if you all did the same. Bills included. Yeah, nice and easy. It was fine. And now it's, you have to really consider how long your shower is going to take.
Wi-Fi, yeah. There's so much to think about. So did you buy when you started F1?
Yeah. So we bought together, basically. Very fortunate to be able to do that.
What about you? Did you kind of find the struggle at the beginning?
Yeah.
Like transitioned, and how are you finding it a few more years down the line now?
Yes, I was really lucky. I went on Spare Room. I viewed a few different flats, and I just really clicked with this flat with the 3 people in it. And I ended up living there for 2 years, and it just worked out really well. And I was really, really lucky. But then actually, to be honest, I ended up having to leave that flat because everybody else moved out. And then I lived in another Spare Room flat, which didn't work out very well. So Spare Room can be very hit and miss. And I was just really lucky the first time. But I think it's important to think about things, especially as a doctor, when you're doing night shifts, when you're doing long days, weekends, just knowing who you're living with, all your housemates, be accommodating to the fact that sometimes you might be like, do you mind keeping it down? Or, you know, you want people who are tidy. Things like that are really important to consider, and quite different from when you're at medical school, where those things don't matter as much and you can cope with a slightly messier house or staying up a bit late. When you're working, those things are more important. So Simon, you've just started F1, haven't you?
I have.
And what did you start on?
Cardiology.
Wow. And how have you found like the first few months?
I've really enjoyed it, actually. It's stressful, but you know it's going to be stressful. No one says being a doctor is not going to be stressful. So it's fully expected. The job itself has been fantastic. I really can't complain too much at all. My particular job, no night shifts, which is fantastic, and only 1 weekend every month, which is absolutely fine by me. It does mean weekends become quite busy, got to say.
And what was your first like day or week like? Can you share with us?
No, that wasn't the best week, to be fair. Everyone was new, as you can imagine, except for the registrars and the consultants. All of my SHOs were new. No one really knew how to use a computer system, except for the few SHOs that had recently been in the hospital I'm in. So it was a massive learning experience for everyone, which is not ideal, really. It was an incredibly busy week as well. Very shortly after that, it became smooth. It became very smooth. The days became shorter, not staying back late and stuff. It was fine. But yeah, that first week was busy. Just because every single job you wanted to do, you had to ask someone how to do it. Simple things like prescribing paracetamol.
Yeah.
How do you do it? You get a bit of experience in medical school, but it's very different when your name is attached to it. You want to make sure you're doing it right. So asking senior doctors for the most simple jobs took some time.
Yeah, and I think that's actually something I've experienced every time I've changed rotation, because in F1 and 2, obviously, you change every 4 months. As a paediatric trainee, I've changed every 6 months, and often that is new departments or new hospitals. But I think one thing that we're not very good at is giving ourselves some time to just adjust. And I think I personally found, I don't know if you guys felt this when I started, I felt really guilty for taking a long time to do these things. But actually, you're at the beginning and you will take time to do simple things. Having done it for a few years, you look back and you actually know at the beginning I was slow and I will get faster. So now I basically just allow myself to be slow, because I know I will take time and I know I will get quicker and more efficient. But yeah, it is really hard at the beginning. Even if you do all the training and you have the mandatory training and you do induction, when you're actually doing it on the shop floor in a hospital on a ward, it's quite difficult.
But having now completed F1 and I've rotated through 4 departments, like each time you start in a new department, you kind of get there and it's as busy as, you know, your previous rotation, and everyone is just thinking, what are we doing? How do we run things on this, you know, ward? Because every ward is just so different. You know, people do their ward rounds differently. People have different systems of, you know, how they clerk their patients. So it is a steep learning curve. But within a week, like, you just need to remember that everyone's going through the exact same thing. You can always ask for help and you will get there.
I have found that sometimes people have like handbooks, like a previous F1 will have made a handbook to hand over to the next one so that they know what to expect or how to do things, or like a guide. Sometimes I've had that, which is really helpful, but sometimes it can be really hard to kind of know how to do things and what to do.
Yeah, I didn't get that.
Yeah, maybe you should make one.
I make one.
You can make one for the next cardiology lot. Maddie, I see you're nodding your head there. Have you had any experience of handbooks?
We're all online for our hospital, which I found really strange but really helpful, because I was paper notes in med school. And we've got a kind of juniors folder, and it's got like a big, massive Word document on there on kind of just like tips on kind of how to request certain things. You know, sometimes you request something online and then it needs to be written in a random ward book. It's just how to actually do that and who you need to communicate with to make sure that has definitely happened, as you were saying. So it's not got everything on there, but it's a good basis, and it was definitely helpful when starting. So yeah, some things I think you just have to learn along the way. You don't know until you've done it the first time.
I think one thing that I need to say is that the consultants have gone through how many F1s at this point? Like, they know exactly what level you are. They've seen so many F1s and F2s go through those doors for 4 months and then leave again. They pick up the pieces pretty well. Like, it was a stressful week, like I said at the start. It was probably actually quite a lot less stressful than I thought. I was just stressed because I was new to the job. They were very nice. They were more than willing to help me with the things that I can do in my sleep now.
Yeah, that's really nice.
Also, going back to your point about consultants, I remember the consultant on my geriatrics job, my first week, bless her, she was amazing. So she would stay late with us. She'd say, Zani, right, how many TTAs do you have to do? Which ones can I do? Which jobs can I do with you? And I was just like, is this normal that a consultant does TTAs with me? But she was just amazing. So as you say, they do look out for you and they do know what's going on.
It's rare for a senior to completely forget what it's like to be a junior.
Yeah.
It happens very rarely.
What kind of things from a shadowing perspective, what kind of things would you say are helpful to pick up?
I found requesting, knowing how to request different things on the computer system was really useful from my shadowing period. Also using paper notes and just setting out, how to fully document. Obviously you practice in medical school when you go on the ward round and you're able to, that's probably your most useful job as a scribe, as a medical student.
Yeah.
But actually when you're writing, the date, the time, the obs, and, who's on this ward round and all the important pieces of information, that was something I learned from the person I was shadowing, and especially how the consultant likes it to be done. So it gave me a bit of a head start doing the shadowing in the department I was starting in.
Yeah.
I'd completely agree with that. That was really my answer. Best thing to learn is to figure out exactly what you need to write in the notes and what you can probably leave out just for time's sake.
Yeah.
Because if a consultant is going to do an examination, you need to they probably don't look at you and tell you exactly what they're finding. They'll listen to the chest and nod and go, okay, that means the chest is clear.
Yeah.
Chest
I'm like, what did the chest sound like? And
well, they don't say anything. You're like, right, chest clear. We found you.
Or they'll feel the abdomen and the patient isn't screaming and the consultant hasn't been like, oh, there's a lump there. So it's just, okay, no, do a little smile, like,
And you write soft, non-tender.
Yeah.
that's empty.
Maddie, what about using a computer system? Is there anything that you would advise to anyone shadowing about what kind of things would be helpful to have in advance?
Things like the first week, knowing logins. My login for my logging onto a computer was for some reason slightly different for the log on to kind of our electronic note system that we use. Just making sure that you've got all of those and they work. Many people's passwords weren't working or they didn't have access, which obviously you need to sort before day one. And just knowing kind of all the different codes, printers. I didn't have printing access for a hot minute, which as a F1 was actually much more important than I first realised. Yeah, just making sure that that stuff is all sorted before you start your first shift, because there's going to be lots of stuff that you struggle with on your first shift, and you don't want not being able to print being kind of another big kind of obstacle that you find on your first shift.
Yeah, I agree. And printing labels, like blood labels, where do they print? How do you print them? Where's the chute? Is there a chute? Those sorts of things are also really important. And the other thing I always say is make sure you know where the canteen is, where coffee is, and when they close. Because I remember my first weekend, it was like 3:30 and I was like, great, I'm going to go get lunch. And the canteen closed at 3. And there was literally like some of these hospitals, all they have is a Costa and a canteen that closes at 3. And then you're like, cool, I have to have a toasty and I'm doing a 13-hour shift. So those are like, or just make sure you bring lunch, because then you don't even have to stress about that. So Zani, what would you say is one of the biggest things you've learned about yourself as a doctor?
It's quite difficult to answer, but I think a year on, having worked for a full year now, I can reflect back on just my experiences and what I've been through. I think the biggest thing I've learned about myself is I'm a lot more resilient than I thought I was. So I would look at, a rota and be like, oh, I've got all these nights, I've got a weekend shift, how do I do them? And you just kind of get on with it and you learn it as you go, and you can do it. And I think I've learned I actually do have a can-do attitude. I'm quite positive about things, and you just get on with it. So yeah, you're stronger than you think you are. It might not feel like it whilst you're going through it, but you kind of just look back after a year and you're like, actually, I did that and I did that well. And, if I can do it, anyone can really do it. So yeah, you'll get there.
How about yourselves? Like, you've both just started F1, but what do you think you've learned about yourself?
So it's great, the learning process of figuring out what you are like under stress. I found a really amazing feeling, because everyone knows that being a doctor is a stressful job. You're in a high stress environment. People are very unwell. There's serious consequences for every action that you do, and yet you have to remain professional and you can't lose yourself too much in that stress. So just learning what kind of person you are under stress and trying to sort of mitigate the bad things that come out. So when you get frustrated, as everyone I'm sure does, and you don't want to snap at people because you're in a professional environment. So learning what makes you tick, what makes you frustrated, what you do when you're frustrated, and then trying to mitigate that. I found that's been a huge learning experience, and I've only been doing the job for a few months, and I'm sure I'll get better at it.
I think it comes with time. Like for me, I find take myself off the ward when it's an appropriate time, walk and get a chocolate bar. You're just by yourself. And I think when I first started, I didn't leave the ward at all. And then I made a rule with myself, leave the ward for 5 minutes at least, walk and get some lunch, just go and get your steps in and come back. And then you come back and you press the reset button.
I've absolutely found the lunch breaks to be so useful for just when everything seems to be building up. Ward round has taken hours and hours and hours, and you've got this huge list of things to do that you will never get done before you have to leave. Yeah. You go to lunch, you look at it and think, oh, actually, most of these things are simple prescriptions that are going to take 2 minutes. It's fine.
Everything's easier when you're not hungry. Yeah. Maddie, how about yourself? What do you think you've learned about yourself?
One thing that maybe surprised me about myself was in med school, you've got the phrase of see one, do one, teach one, which I always thought, how can you possibly see something done once and then be expected to do it and then teach it? And I found actually I was doing that quite a bit in the first few months of working. And it's amazing kind of actually you can pick up things quite easily because you're just surrounded by it every single day. You've got lots of people often who are willing to teach you when they can, when there's time for it. So yeah, I think that quite surprised me. It's really useful to be in an environment where you're working with similar people and the same team, and that's not kind of something I had as a med student. That cohesiveness of kind of getting to know people, that was really helpful.
Yeah, for sure. Sani, you've done quite a bit of rotation work. So how have you found that kind of switching between different rotations, as we all do in F1 and 2?
Yeah, it doesn't change really. So, 5 o'clock on the Tuesday, you're a geriatrics F1. 7:30 next morning, you're a general surgery F1, and you just have to go with it because, that's the nature of the beast. Often as F1 rotating, you kind of don't really have a base. So because you're not a permanent member of that firm and you rotate every 4 months, it's hard to really, get yourself a locker or get yourself a parking space. These aren't things that you get as a rotational trainee because you're not a permanent member of staff. But the one way I've tried to mitigate this is by really getting to know the wider MDT. So nurses, the physios, the OTs, becoming friends with them, like working with them really helps you get that cohesive feeling of being a team. So it's really made my life a lot easier on the ward. A time where this has happened has been where I have been working with the nurses on the geriatrics ward. And obviously on the geriatrics ward, you have a lot of patients who are prone to falls. So just, to get to know them, I offered to sit in with their patients because they were quite short-staffed that day. So I thought, I'm sat here on a laptop doing my work. Why don't I wheel it into the bay? They can go and have their lunch break or their tea break because they're short-staffed. I'll watch the patients, be able to help them. And I think they really appreciated that.
Simon, you're a few months into F1 now. So what advice would you give to someone literally at the beginning of F1, or to even yourself when you just started F1? What do you wish you could tell yourself?
On my first day, you've just passed finals, you're a medical student, you've had the summer off, it's great. You walk onto the ward and suddenly everyone around you is an F2 or above. You're chatting to consultants all the time, chatting to Regis. They're saying words that you've never even heard of on a job that you're meant to be doing for the next 4 months. And you're meant to be the doctor on the ward who's meant to know everything. It can be quite unsettling, and I know it made me feel quite self-conscious about how much I knew, because everyone around you is way more experienced. The nurses know more about the medicine that you're doing because they've been doing it for years, and they come and ask you questions and you just don't know the answer. I think the big thing that I would tell myself is you have actually passed the bar at that point. You've done the exams. Everyone there is willing you to do well, and they all know that you're new, and it's fine to not know everything. Everyone around you is far more experienced, so they're going to know a few things more than you. But you have your own knowledge to add. You know, you've studied for your exams, you've passed it, you got into medical school, which is a huge achievement in itself. Feel wanted, feel like you're part of the team, because you really are.
Andy, how about yourself? What advice would you give to yourself?
One thing that I think is really important to remember when you're working is there is always help. So when you're kind of feeling like you don't know things, as you said, Simon, and you're feeling a bit stuck, or you're just feeling kind of overwhelmed with the number of jobs, number one, you've got a team and people will help. Just make sure you ask for it. And even, let's say, when it's a night shift and you're feeling a bit kind of isolated or by yourself, you can call for help. Make sure you advocate if you're struggling a bit, but help will come if you ask for it.